When I first bought my grandfather's old cabin deep in the woods, I thought it would finally be the peaceful escape I had dreamed about for years. The cabin wasn't fancy, but it had a charm to it, the kind of place where you could sit on the porch and hear nothing but bird song, the rustle of pine trees, and the occasional splash of fish in the lake nearby. After years of living in the city, suffocated by concrete walls and neighbors who could never mind their own business, this cabin felt like heaven. Little did I know my new neighbor was about to turn that heaven into hell. Her name was Karen. She lived in a pristine lakefront property 2 plots over, but she carried herself like she owned the entire forest. The first time I met her, I was unloading firewood from the back of my truck. She marched up the gravel driveway in her pressed khaki shorts, oversized sunglasses, and that unmistakable smirk of entitlement. "You can't just park like that," she said, hands on her hips. "This isn't the city. We have standards here." I raised an eyebrow, trying to keep my cool. "Pretty sure this is my driveway. Unless the forest suddenly came with HOA rules." Karen didn't flinch. "Well, actually, this area does have guidelines. I'm on the neighborhood committee. We care about appearances." "Your truck and that generator I see sitting there. It all looks very disruptive." She wrinkled her nose like she'd smelled something sour. I glanced at the generator she was eyeing. It was a powerful piece of equipment, something my grandfather had invested in years ago, wired directly into the cabin to ensure power during storms or outages. Out here, the grid wasn't reliable, and the generator was a lifeline. "That generator is staying," I said firmly. "This is my cabin, not a showroom." Her lips curled into a thin smile, the kind that promised trouble. "We'll see about that." At first, I brushed it off. I'd heard stories about people like her, HOA busybodies, control freaks who thought they had authority over everyone. I figured if I kept to myself, she'd lose interest. But Karen wasn't that type. Within the first week, she filed a noise complaint about my generator, even though it only ran during the evenings and was quieter than her obnoxious leaf blower. Then she left notes taped to my front door demanding I conform to community standards. I laughed them off, tossing them into the fire pit. But then something strange started happening. My generator fuel would drain faster than usual. At first I thought I was miscalculating, but after keeping track, I realized gallons were vanishing overnight. One morning I stepped outside and caught faint footprints leading from my property back toward the path that connected to Karen's backyard. My stomach tightened. She wasn't just nosy, she was stealing. I decided to test my theory. One evening, I filled the generator's tank to the brim, marking the fuel level with chalk. By morning, nearly a quarter of it was gone. That was the confirmation I needed. Karen wasn't satisfied with trying to control me. She wanted to use me. She had her fancy lights strung across her deck, her heated jacuzzi, and her endless pool parties with HOA friends. My guess? She had figured out a way to siphon off my generator power when the grid couldn't keep up with her extravagant lifestyle. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping black coffee and staring out into the shadows of the trees, thinking about my options. I could confront her, but people like Karen were slippery. She'd deny everything, maybe even turn the tables and accuse me. I could report her, but the sheriff's office was hours away, and frankly, they had bigger things to worry about than a nosy neighbor siphoning power. So I made a choice. If Karen wanted to keep playing games, I'd play too. Only difference? I wasn't going to lose. It all started with a trip into town. I stocked up on tools, wires, and some heavy-duty equipment from the hardware store. The clerk gave me a strange look when I hauled everything to the counter. But I just smiled and said I was fixing up the cabin. Back at home, I spent hours in the basement workshop, sketching out plans on the workbench, just like my grandfather used to do. The generator was already wired into the cabin's electrical system, but with a little clever engineering, I could turn it into something more. Something that wouldn't just keep me safe, but would punish anyone trying to steal from me. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, I had the first phase of my plan ready. The generator hummed softly beside the cabin, its steady rhythm echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet night. I crouched beside it, tightening the last bolts on a rig I had built. My grandfather always told me, "Son, the woods don't care if you're kind or cruel. You survive by being smart." And smart meant staying one step ahead of people like Karen. Little did she know, the next time she tried to leech off my power, she was in for the shock of her life, literally. The next morning I woke to the sound of hammering. At first I thought it was just the echo of woodpeckers tapping at the pines, but no. It was sharper, more deliberate. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside, only to see Karen and two of her so-called HOA committee members putting up a large wooden sign at the entrance to the trail that led down to the lakeside cabins. The letters, painted in bold red, read, "Community standards apply. No generators, no unsightly equipment, no exceptions." I rubbed my eyes in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, striding toward her. Karen, dressed in her usual sun hat and pearls, as though she were attending some garden party, instead of vandalizing public property, turned to me with that smug grin. "Morning, neighbor. Just a little notice for everyone. We've had some complaints." "Complaints from who?" I asked, folding my arms. "There are only 3 cabins on this side of the lake. One's abandoned. The other belongs to me. So unless you're tattling on yourself, I don't see how this makes sense." Her 2 cronies, middle-aged men who looked like they'd been dragged from their recliners, shifted uncomfortably. But Karen stood tall, her chin tilted with fake authority. "We believe in preserving the beauty of this place. Your generator is loud, disruptive, and frankly, an eyesore. We're giving you fair warning to remove it." I laughed. "Fair warning? Lady, this isn't some HOA suburb with manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. This is the woods. My generator isn't going anywhere. If you don't like it, don't look at it." Her smile faltered for a moment before she composed herself. "Suit yourself. But remember, we do have ways of enforcing community rules." I walked back toward my porch, shaking my head. Yeah, good luck enforcing rules that don't exist. But despite my bravado, her words stuck in my mind. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was escalating. I could already sense she wasn't going to stop at signs or empty threats. Sure enough, by the end of the week, she doubled down. One evening, while I was cooking dinner inside, the generator cut out suddenly. I stepped outside and found the extension cord I used for my shed, completely missing. A quick glance toward the trees revealed faint light flickering in the distance. Karen's deck was lit up like a carnival. She had stolen my extension cord, bold as daylight, and was using my power for her own backyard party. That was the moment I knew I couldn't play nice anymore. I decided to confront her directly. Marching down the path, I found her guests sipping wine, laughing, and splashing in the jacuzzi. Karen herself was lounging on a chair, waving her glass around like a queen holding court. When she saw me, her face lit up in mock surprise. "Oh, hello?" she said sweetly. "You're just in time to join us. You don't mind if we borrow a little juice, do you? The grid's been so unreliable lately." I clenched my fists. "That juice is my fuel, Karen. That generator costs me money and you're stealing from me." She waved a hand dismissively. "Stealing? Oh, don't be dramatic. We're all neighbors here. Sharing is caring. And besides, it's not like you need all that power in your little shack." Her guests chuckled, feeding off her arrogance. "I'm warning you," I said, lowering my voice. "Touch my property again and you'll regret it." Her smile widened, her eyes glinting with defiance. "Is that a threat? Because I could make a call right now, and I guarantee the sheriff would be on your porch before mine. After all, who are they going to believe? A respected homeowner like me? Or some guy hiding in the woods with a noisy machine?" The way she said it, dripping with condescension, lit a fire in me. But instead of exploding, I turned on my heel and walked back to my cabin. Losing my temper wouldn't help. Karen thought she was untouchable, that she could manipulate the system and bully me into submission. But she didn't know who she was messing with. That night, under the cover of darkness, I made adjustments to my setup. I reinforced the generator housing, added concealed wiring, and set up a monitoring system with motion sensors I'd ordered online. If Karen wanted to keep sneaking around, I'd know the moment she stepped foot near my cabin. As I worked, I remembered something my grandfather used to say: "The woods are honest. They'll give you what you put into them. But people? People will lie, cheat, and take until you have nothing left." He'd taught me how to survive out here. How to rig traps and outthink predators, human ones included. By the time the moon was high, I was sweaty, exhausted, but satisfied. The generator purred quietly, But now it wasn't just a machine keeping my lights on. It was a trap, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the next greedy hand that tried to steal from it. And I didn't have to wait long. The very next night, at around midnight, I heard the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. My heart raced as I switched off my cabin light and peered through the window. Sure enough, a shadowy figure crept toward the generator, crouching low. The motion sensor tripped, sending a faint alert to my phone. My camera caught the outline of her sun hat and flowing shawl. Karen. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to burst out the door. Instead, I watched silently as she fiddled with the wires, her flashlight beam darting around like a thief in a hurry. She tugged at the cables, clearly trying to hook up her extension again. Only this time, things weren't going to end the way she expected. Karen crouched in front of my generator, like a raccoon pouring through garbage, convinced she could outsmart me. I stayed hidden inside, watching her through the glow of the surveillance feed on my phone. My pulse thudded in my ears as she pulled out the stolen extension cord she'd been using. She moved with the arrogance of someone who had done this before, confident no one would stop her. But what Karen didn't know was that the moment she clipped the cord onto the exposed prong, the rig I had set up sent a mild but startling electric pulse through the line. Nothing strong enough to injure, just enough to make a thief think twice. A shriek split the night. Ow, what the? Her flashlight tumbled into the dirt, rolling away as she rubbed her hand furiously. She looked around wildly, as though someone had jumped out of the woods and slapped her. But when she saw no one, she hissed under her breath and tried again. Another jolt. Another yelp. Damn thing's broken, she spat, shaking her hand. I nearly laughed out loud in the dark of my living room. She thought the generator was malfunctioning, not realizing it was deliberately protecting itself from intruders like her. My grandfather would have been proud of this setup, simple, effective, and teaching the kind of lesson books never could. Still, I wasn't ready to reveal my hand. Karen needed to dig her own hole deeper, so I let her retreat, muttering angrily as she stormed back toward her glowing palace of a house. Her silhouette disappeared among the pines, but I knew she wouldn't give up. People like Karen never did. The next day, sure enough, she returned, this time in broad daylight. I was chopping wood when I heard her heels crunching across the gravel. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Your machine is a hazard," she declared, pointing a manicured finger at the generator. "Last night I tried to plug in my emergency lights and nearly electrocuted myself." I set down the axe slowly, raising an eyebrow. "So you admit you were on my property at midnight, messing with my equipment?" Her face turned red, but she recovered quickly, her voice climbing into a screech. "Don't twist my words. I was trying to ensure community safety. That machine is dangerous, and if you don't remove it, I'll have no choice but to escalate this matter." I leaned on the axe handle, staring her down. "Karen, let me make this crystal clear. Step foot on my property again and you'll regret it. That generator isn't going anywhere. You've been warned." Her lips trembled, but she forced a smirk. "We'll see what the sheriff has to say." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed back up the trail. For a moment, I wondered if she actually would call the sheriff. But when 2 days passed with no patrol car, I knew she had decided to handle things her way instead. That was worse. Karen liked control, and she wasn't about to give up on her power theft scheme. If she couldn't scare me into compliance, she'd escalate until she got what she wanted. That night, I stayed awake later than usual, keeping the cabin dark so it looked like I was asleep. Around 1 in the morning, the motion sensor pinged again. Karen was back, this time with gloves on and a toolbox slung over her shoulder. She knelt by the generator, clearly determined to bypass whatever had shocked her before. "Persistent little snake," I muttered under my breath. Through the camera, I watched her pry open one of the panels and start tampering with the wires. This was where my patience wore thin. She wasn't just stealing anymore. She was risking damage to the machine that kept my lights and fridge running. I quietly slipped outside, staying in the shadows until I was close enough to hear her muttering. "Stupid thing. I'll show him who's boss out here." I stepped forward, letting my boot crunch on a branch. She froze. "Having trouble?" I asked, my voice steady but loud enough to send her heart racing. She whipped around, eyes wide in the beam of her flashlight. I was just making sure it wasn't leaking fuel." "Right," I said dryly. "At 1 in the morning. With a stolen extension cord in your bag." Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flash across her face. But then, like all bullies, she covered it with bluster. "You can't talk to me like that. I'm on the committee. This generator is a public nuisance." "No," I said firmly, stepping closer. "This generator is mine. My grandfather built this cabin, and that machine has kept it running for decades. You don't get to take what doesn't belong to you." Her face twisted in anger. "Then you leave me no choice. If you won't share, I'll make sure you're forced out. One way or another." With that, she shoved past me, storming back toward her property. My fists clenched at my sides. She was out of control, and it was only a matter of time before she tried something even more dangerous. That night, I sat at my workbench, staring at the blueprints I'd sketched for the generator modifications. What I had so far was enough to give her a warning jolt, but it wouldn't stop her for good. I needed something smarter, something that wouldn't just protect the generator, but also expose her theft publicly. Because if there was one thing Karen couldn't stand, it was being humiliated. By dawn, I had a new plan. The generator wouldn't just defend itself anymore. It would record everything, capture evidence, and deliver a shock strong enough to send her running without real harm. When the time came, I'd have proof of her trespassing, her theft, and her lies. Karen thought she was waging a quiet little war. She didn't know I had just declared war back. For days after my last confrontation with Karen, I barely slept. I kept replaying her greedy face in my head and imagining how she would escalate next. She had the kind of stubbornness that turned small wars into full-blown battles, and I knew if I didn't end it cleanly, it would only get worse, so I put every ounce of my focus into finishing what I had started, making the generator more than a deterrent, making it a witness and a guard all at once. I rewired the intake and output lines, so any unauthorized connection would trigger a multi-tiered response. First, the motion sensors would flag the area, then a camera I'd hidden beneath the eaves would start recording and send the footage to my cloud backup simultaneously. I added a smart relay to the circuit that would detect when the line was bridged without authorization and log the exact time and voltage draw in a readout that could not be tampered with. My grandfather had taught me how to make simple circuits foolproof, how to make them record what they saw, so a liar could not simply deny what had been captured. But the piece de resistance was a safety pulse rig I designed to deliver a sharp, surprising jolt enough to make a thief drop whatever she was handling. Without causing lasting harm, I calibrated it carefully, balancing bite with safety, testing it on scrap metal, and then on an old fence post until I was satisfied. The point was not to injure. It was to teach, to shock, to humiliate, if necessary, and to ensure whoever tried to tap into my system would never want to try again. On the afternoon I finished the final checks, the weather turned ugly, thunderheads rolled over the treetops, and the kind of wind that sets small branches rattling kicked up. I could have taken that as a sign to wait, but there was something about the sky that felt like permission, like the world itself was backing my little operation. I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the clouds and sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the faint hum of the generator working like a small heart, keeping my cabin alive. Night came thick and early. The wind thrashed the pines, and the lake reflected nothing but a black mirror. I made sure the solar backups were charged, and the cloud recorder was online. I checked the relay one more time, the readout steadied the system sleeping but ready. Then I turned my phone screen to receive alerts and left the cabin lights low enough to look empty. I wanted her to think the coast was clear. I wanted her to come and make a spectacle of herself. She came later than I expected, maybe because the storm made the whole place feel like a stage set only truly important people could see. For a few minutes, I watched the feed, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and dread. There she was, crouched low under her umbrella, like a ridiculous parody of stealth. Her face was pale even before the first pulse hit the line. She moved with more purpose this time, her hands steady, as she worked her way toward the generator, like someone who had rehearsed the steps in private. When she bridged the relay, the system did what it was supposed to do. The smart relay detected an unauthorized draw. The camera blinked to life, the cloud saved the first frame, and my phone buzzed in my pocket, alerting me to the breach. The moment her fingers touched the connector, The pulse ran through the cable, forcing her to drop whatever she was holding with an audible curse that was swallowed. By the wind, she staggered back, clutching her hand, and for a beat the world held its breath. She didn't scream. She hardly made noise at first, but her expression was priceless shock, mingled with the fury of someone humiliated in front of invisible witnesses. The shock was sharp enough to jolt her, but not enough to harm, and she realized immediately that she had been bested by something she could not bully or buy. Her face crumpled as she sat on the gravel and tried to compose herself while rain began to hammer down in earnest. I watched as she wiped her hand on her skirt and looked around like a trapped animal, searching for a hole in the fence. She found none. In the feed, the camera captured her, pulling her phone out and making furious calls, pacing like a caged tiger, while the clouds turned the whole scene into something from an old silent movie. The cloud recorder saved every moment, and the smart relay logged the exact time and voltage spike, which would later prove without a doubt that she had been stealing power from my generator. Instead of fleeing, she stood and did the most foolish thing she could have done. She marched right up to the edge of my property, courage or madness I couldn't tell, and pointed toward the camera as though issuing a challenge. "You think you can hide behind gadgets and traps?" she shouted into the wind. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" Her voice carried strangely over the rain and trees, as if the forest itself were listening. For a moment I almost felt sorry, but then I remembered the night she'd drained my fuel, the way she'd laughed at me when I tried to reason with her, the way she'd used her committee like a club. After everything she'd done, she had no right to moral outrage, only consequences, and if that came with a little spectacle, so be it. The rain plastered her shawl to her shoulders, and the lights from her deck flashed a ridiculous glow behind her, like the altar of some petty god she worshipped. She fumbled with something in her handbag, and for a split second I thought she was trying to press charges or call in reinforcements. Instead, she brandished a little recorder and began to rant into it loudly. Something about harassment, about illegal devices, about bullying from neighbors. It read like a script she'd practiced the night before, but her face betrayed her. She was scrambling for control, and she could sense the tide turning. Within an hour, the first of her messages started to appear online because she was not subtle. She loved an audience. She posted a shaky video claiming I had booby-trapped her property, claiming I had assaulted and threatened a respected homeowner. The narrative was predictable and practiced, but so was I. I had backups, the cloud footage, the relay logs, timestamps, and a dozen images of her fingerprints on the connector, all time-stamped and impossible to refute. I uploaded everything to an account I'd set up anonymous at first, and then began to send copies to people who mattered: the county board, the sheriff, the local news outlet that ran human interest pieces, and the neighborhood pages where Karen did so much of her preening. What I hadn't expected was the reaction in the immediate aftermath. People who had once turned away from the spectacle began to take notice. The local online community, which loved a scandal, started to question the narrative. A few even reached out, asking for proof, saying they smelled a setup and were tired of Karen's theatrics. The sheriff's office called wanting to see the footage, and the county board put a temporary hold on any committee action until an investigation could be completed. By morning, the story wasn't just about a jolt or a generator anymore. It was about truth and the public record and the difference between making rules and breaking the law. Karen had tried to weaponize reputation as armor and found it had holes. The trap I'd set had done. More than deliver a shock, it had exposed her for what she was: a bully with a megaphone and nothing but entitlement to back her up. I sat on my porch in the quiet after the storm, with a cup of coffee that tasted better than any celebration, and watched the little blue readout on my phone showing the relay logs. The numbers were clean, undeniable. The footage was crisp. The evidence sat like an unbreakable wall between her lies and the truth. I felt the old relief of someone who had been given a second chance to stand up and to keep standing. And while it was not the end yet, I knew it was the beginning of the unraveling of Karen's crusade. The woods had witnessed her greed and recorded it for the world to see, and in the pale morning that followed the storm, there was a stillness that felt like justice waiting to be served. The moment Karen's fingers closed around the handle of my generator shed, the air seemed to hold its breath. I had reinforced that door with a clever little trick. A deterrent system my uncle, an electrician with a wicked sense of humor, had helped me install years ago. Nothing lethal, of course, just a controlled electric shock meant to discourage any trespassers who thought they could siphon power from me. Karen yanked the door open with her usual flare of entitlement, completely unaware of what she had just triggered. The second her hand pulled back, a sharp crack echoed, and she let out a blood-curdling scream that probably woke every raccoon within 5 miles of my cabin. She stumbled back, clutching her hand dramatically, as though I had blasted her with lightning straight from the heavens. The irony was almost poetic. Now you might think I rushed out, apologizing or showing concern. But you'd be wrong. I had been dealing with Karen's harassment for months, and this was the natural consequence of her relentless attempts to violate my property. From my porch, I watched her dance around like she had just stepped barefoot on a hornet's nest, muttering curses at me, at the generator, and probably at the entire HOA board for not backing her up in person. The truth was, I didn't need to lift a finger. My system worked exactly as designed, just enough of a sting to make sure Karen thought twice before ever pulling that stunt again. But of course, this was Karen we were talking about. Rational thinking wasn't in her vocabulary. Instead of retreating, she screeched at the top of her lungs, "He assaulted me! This is illegal! I'm calling the cops!" She whipped out her phone with her unshocked hand, stomping around my driveway like she was summoning reinforcements for a battlefield. I leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, and said calmly, "You go ahead and do that. Karen, make sure you tell them you broke into my shed while trying to steal my generator power." Her face twisted like she had just bitten into a lemon. Within 20 minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies rolled up the gravel path in their cruiser, headlights sweeping over the woods. Karen ran to them dramatically, tears streaming down her cheeks as she waved her singed fingers in their faces, spinning a tale about how I had rigged a murder trap that nearly killed her. The deputies looked from her to me, clearly skeptical. I invited them to check out the shed themselves, explaining every detail of the deterrent system, safe, legal, and well within my rights to protect my off-grid property. I even showed them the posted signs warning against trespass. Karen's jaw practically hit the dirt when the officers turned to her and said, "Ma'am, sounds like you trespassed and tried to tamper with equipment that didn't belong to you. You're lucky it wasn't worse." For once, she was speechless. The deputies warned her that any further harassment or tampering with my property could land her with real criminal charges. They left her standing there, humiliated, while I tried to hold back my laughter. Karen stomped away, muttering about lawsuits and conspiracies, but her aura of self-importance had taken a serious hit. Still, I knew Karen wasn't the type to give up so easily. In fact, the smug little smirk she gave me as she climbed into her car made my stomach twist with the uneasy sense that she was planning something bigger, nastier, and far more dangerous. And I was right, because the next time she showed up, she wouldn't come alone. After the deputies left, I thought maybe, just maybe, Karen had finally learned her lesson, but deep down I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of person to accept humiliation quietly. Sure enough, 2 nights later, just as the moon was cresting over the treetops, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again. This time it wasn't just her car. A convoy of 3 SUVs rolled up, their headlights cutting through the woods like searchlights. Out stepped Karen, flanked by 2 men who looked more like hired muscle than neighbors. She had clearly decided to escalate, and she was wearing that smirk that said she thought she had already won. I stayed hidden on my porch, lights off, watching the scene unfold. Karen strutted toward the generator shed like it was her birthright, barking orders at the men to take it apart and move it. We're installing it for community use. I almost laughed out loud. She had actually hired people to steal my property in plain sight. What she didn't realize was that after her last stunt, I had doubled down on security. The cameras were rolling, alarms were armed, and the deterrent system had been upgraded with a few extra surprises. The moment her hired muscle touched the shed door, a blaring siren went off that echoed through the forest. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the driveway in harsh white light. The men jumped back, startled, while Karen tried to wave it off like nothing was wrong. "Keep going," she screeched, covering her ears from the noise. But before they could make another move, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up again, this time much faster than before. Turns out the system I had installed sent a direct alert to local law enforcement, and they responded immediately. The deputies stepped out, hands on their belts, clearly fed up with the situation. "Ma'am," one of them said firmly, "this is now attempted theft, criminal trespass, and conspiracy. You're done." Karen's face went pale. She tried to twist the story again, claiming it was her right to control neighborhood power, but the deputies weren't having it. They cuffed her right there in front of her hired help, who quickly raised their hands and tried to distance themselves from her insanity. The sight of Karen being shoved into the back of a squad car was more satisfying than I could have imagined. The fallout was swift. The HOA, embarrassed beyond belief, distanced themselves from Karen completely. She was slapped with charges, fines, and a restraining order that legally barred her from stepping foot near my cabin again. The men she'd hired ratted her out in exchange for lighter punishments, and Karen's reputation crumbled in the community she once thought she ruled. For the first time in months, I finally had peace. The woods were quiet again, the generator hummed faithfully in its shed, and my nights were free of the constant anxiety of her intrusions. As I sat on the porch the next morning, coffee in hand, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Karen thought she could bully, steal, and manipulate her way into controlling me, but all she did was orchestrate her own downfall. My cabin remained mine, my generator remained untouched, and Karen was left powerless in every sense of the word. Sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of revenge. It comes in the form of watching someone dig their own grave, one entitled decision at a time.